And we're live. Hey guys, welcome back to Whiskey Charlie, the War Game Chat, our monthly show on YouTube. I'm your host, Mo from Mo's Game Table, and joining me are my co-hosts, everybody's favorite Gimp with the Limp, TheGimpyGamer, Nate Rogers. How's it going, Nate?
It's another glorious day, man. Another glorious day. Happy to be here.
And the War Gaming Wizard from Oz, Kev Sharp from the Big Board. How's it going, Kev?
Wonderful.
And we've got two very special guests, return guests. We've had them on before. We've got Fabrizio Vianello and Tony Morfitt from Thin Red Line Games. We're going to be talking about their new game, The Fate of All, which is now out, and it's almost sold out. So if you've not gotten your copy yet, you need to get your order in because it's going to be gone just like that. So make sure you get it in promptly, or preferably even before the end of the show. We're going to see if we can sell out the last of the copies here today. We'll see if everybody can accept that challenge or not. But welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you very much, sir.
So it's all out now in the wild. People are receiving it. I know Kev's got his. He's got a shrink wrap that he did on it. And a buddy of mine has already sent me notice that he's gotten his. He's all excited. So other people are posting about it online. So the reception has been very well so far on this game. You guys have to be really thrilled with that.
Yeah, I think we are. It's, having been known for the last 3 years, all we've done is World War III or whatever. We can leap backwards about, 2,500 years. Was a bit of a surprise to everybody, me included, I think. But Fabrizio will tell you about that decision in a minute if he wants to. But yeah, we are very, very happy that it's, we seem to have found some resonance. People like the look of the thing, and they appear to be buying it. It's great.
Yeah, it was quite a surprise, and we are right now down to only 60 copy left, and so I think it will be probably over in just a few days. And it was a jump in the dark, if you want, because of course we were specialized on Third World War, and so the 2,000 years back was quite a gamble, but there's always been my other big passion, the classical antiquity, the classical period, and I always loved it, and as I always wanted to make a game on the Third World War, I always wanted to make a game on Alexander, and so that's it.
Fantastic. And I've been cheering for this from the sidelines. So, yeah, that's great.
Now you need to mix the two. You need to have, does anybody remember the old Casca books?
Sorry?
Does anybody remember the books, Casca? The guy the mercenary who basically traveled through time fighting in endless wars. You can have a guy from ancient times fighting in World War III, and then you can have him just kind of doing
a sort of time tripper.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah, we could feel like that. Yeah, that's true.
So I think there's going to be a linking module. You'll be able to link Alexander the Great to Deadly Northern Lights. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as we were discussing before, we were discussing the missing air support in the Fate of All, and it's clearly something that we forgot.
Well, that's the next expansion. Will be the air.
Yeah.
Will be the air support, the artillery, the armor, and of course the
no, artillery and armor we've got, mate. It's just not, terribly mobile, and it doesn't move around that much.
Yeah.
But on a slightly, not terribly serious, but slightly serious note. I mean, what's quite fascinating when you pull them together, because if you're pulling it at the operational level, the challenges are the same, or the challenges are very, very similar. Is how do you move your armies from A to B? How do you secure your supply lines? How do you do this? How do you do that? How do you get the drop on the guy who you're taking on? But you're doing it at a different pace and a different time. Well, not necessarily at a different pace, because it's quite a lot of 20th and 21st century stuff was still being done by blokes on feet, walking around.
Yeah, boots on the ground, right?
Yeah. The supply, the basic problems are really very, very similar to problems of Napoleon's era, or even marginally to the problems during the American Civil War. Uh, with railroads started to change things, obviously, but more or less the problems were the same. And the solutions too were probably uh, very similar or the same. And we had me and Tony made a lot of research on the logistics of the era, and a lot of research on the supply and supply. Probably like in our World War III games, supply is really the key concept, the core concept of the Fate of War 2. This is something that there are very good simulation of classical antiquity already on the market, but I've always found that they were excessively simplified, and if you don't represent in a correct way the causes, the problems that an ancient army had, you are not able to represent how difficult a certain campaign could be. That's
Yeah, I mean, although, right, at this point, this is not a game for logisticians, this is not Loggie's
No.
Paradise,
Yeah.
Campaign for North Africa, Volume 2, you first saw it here. But this is about what we always try to get, which is to allow the guy who's playing, the bloke on the other side of the table, to make those big boy operational decisions. Am I going to Egypt first, or am I going into Asia Minor first? Am I going to try and take his navy out? Am I going to try and keep it together? All of those kind of things are a decision you take at the beginning will impact what is going to happen. 6 turns down, 8 turns, 10 turns down the line, and we think that's important, and give you the real challenges. The fun part of this is as in almost all our games, is getting your head around it, getting a plan together, trying to outguess your opponent's plan, and then putting it into action. And it leads to tactical battles. Of course, it leads to tactical battles, but the big bit's getting the operational bit right, and that often starts with thinking about the logistics.
I really, before Ev says what he's going to say, I really want to say that I think we need to trademark that comment, big boy operational decisions. I think that it's a fantastic comment.
Well, you're not trademarking it. If anyone's trademarking it,
You need to put it in all the TRL games from now on. It's like, this is a game that's going to give you the opportunity to make big boy
the only difference between this one and the other one is it doesn't deliver big buckets of sunshine. It doesn't have any of those in it.
I'd like to add a couple of examples of what Tony just said. For example, right at the beginning of the campaign, it's the Macedonians that has a lot of problems, of money problems. Their war chest is really almost empty, and there are a lot of expenses to have just for moving the army and so on. And moreover, Alexander had to move very quickly at the beginning. It has to be very fast because the Persians are regrouping, they are mobilizing their armies, they are mobilizing their fleet. That is probably the most dangerous asset that the Persians have initially. And so you have to move very fast. And for example, in one of my personal playtests, after the siege at Halicarnassus, that is usually a quite difficult siege because it's a well fortified city with a good port, and it's quite easy for the Persian to keep it supplied, unless the Macedonians are able somehow to gain the sea superiority. And so after the siege of Halicarnassus, I've tried, it was almost winter, and I've tried to cross the Anatolian Central Mountains to reach Kilikia before winter come. And it was a disaster, a total disaster.
A catastrophe.
Yeah, a catastrophe. Yeah, exactly. Because it's quite it's far from being easy. You have to organize somehow your supply in advance. I didn't make it, and I didn't organize almost anything, and so I had terrible attritions, and it was really not a nice move. That's it.
Yeah, one of the things I like from what I've read so far, and just so everybody knows, I'm literally clipping the counters now and about to set up scenario 1, which is called 10,000 a game. And we'll talk about what that is in a sec. But one of the things I think I like about the system is that so there are only 2 other systems out there that really do operational ancient warfare. And one is, the Richard Berg series, and then the other was the DG Magazine games that, and I forget all their names now. And I was not a big fan of that system at all, just because it was so capricious with its supply and its attrition, and there was no breakdown counters, and you couldn't mark things down, and it didn't work very well for me. Whereas I found Carthage and the Rise of the Roman Republic, it had a nice system, but also it was very abstract. Logistics really didn't play into it too much at all. So I think what you've done is struck this balance between having some detail, meaning that I've got to think about it before I go rushing off through the mountains before winter, right? But I've also got the ability to go and execute across vast distances over months and months in the areas. And you've taken it reminds me a little bit of Kevin Zucker's the higher scale games, the 5X games or 4X games, where they've got attrition at the Napoleonic era, right?
Yeah.
Where the armies are moving and they're losing steps along the way, and they have straggle and they can recover and things like that. I think you've got something akin to that. And so if folks like that type of system, I think they'll really like this much. And so I'm excited about being able to try and plan all that out and experience it over the next week. Once I've got 1 game to finish up here. I've got 10 turns left, and then this is next on the table. So I'm excited about it. So it's pretty interesting stuff, guys.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what we tried to do was what we always try to do, which is give the decision making to the player, and then my very clever friend designs the algorithms and the rules to take all the work away from doing it. So you're not stacking millions of, I've got 18 bushels of this and 27 barrels of that, and none of that nonsense. It's, what do I want to do? How do I want to get there? And how do I divvy up my resources in order to do that? So there's a bit of resource management, but not huge amounts. I mean, it's not, as you chaps from across the ocean would say, it's not a great Euro game in that respect. It's not one of those, or it's not, U-boat management or anything that way. Definitely not. And we tried very, very hard to avoid that kind of nonsense. That's in the table. Roll on the table, it gives you an answer.
Yeah, because you've taken this book, right? Alexander the Great and Logistics of the Macedonian Army. And I know there are some other books that you and I have discussed that, how the Roman army moved itself around in its time. You've distilled down a lot of this into playable mechanics, right? That represent generally across the board, because clearly Alexander hauled off and did some crazy ass things that were one-offs, forced marches and things that he did a couple of times. But I think you capture, when I read this book and look at the rules and look at how things are laid out, it looks pretty cool that you've captured the flavor here without bogging me down with a bunch of tables and dice rolls and stuff, right? So
that was really a key book. It was probably the origin of most reasoning on the supply and the real source for most of the supply routes. It's
that's awesome.
It's an incredible study on
Yes.
on the practical on how
Right.
the logistic of an army like Alexander the Great, so on, practically is working.
But you know what's funny though? I don't think it's changed. It had changed very much all the way up until like the American Civil War, the 1860s or 50s, thereabouts. Because in Europe things happened a little bit different time scale. Classical linear combat. The only thing that changed were the deadliness and the effectiveness and the ranges of the weapons, right?
Yep.
The tactics stayed the same pretty much, or the cavalry eventually fell out of favor. But you have that fantastic, thousands of years of where everyone fought basically like Alexander fought, right? So that's fascinating to me too, which means I think the system, assuming it all plays well, could be applied across a number of different eras.
Yep.
Just saying.
That's the idea. That's the idea. This is hopefully the first book or volume of a series that we have called Strategicon, and we want to cover different eras, different periods, different armies, and so on. I think that probably the next module will go deep diving into the Roman civil wars. It could be Caesar against Pompey, could be Marius against Sulla. Or something like that. We'll see, but anyway, definitely that's the idea.
Yeah.
I would like personally to cover the Punic Wars too, but I think that the Punic Wars will need some adjustments to the rules, because fighting 27 years war in monthly turn it's probably too much for
that might be a long game. Yeah, that might be a long
very,
game.
Very long game. Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have to change a bit.
Anyway, I'm kind of dominating the conversation here. Nate, Mo, someone ask a question.
I didn't want to interrupt you guys while you were on it, but I have been reading over the rules, and you guys are right that an army marches on its stomach, right? They have to have supplies.
Yep.
And I was reading the different types of systems that you've got in the game. So you've got the baggage trains, the supply trains that the army can bring with them. Then you've got the foraging as you're going along, right? So the units or armies can pick up resources as they go. But I like that I was reading in there about the force march and the way that you described it, that the force march wasn't as much as to move the army fast as to move it quickly through areas that did not have the ability to forage. So if it was a dry area or no animals, no resources, you want to get through that area quicker so you're not wasting as many of your resources. Now, I know you have... Go ahead.
This is an area where Tony knows a lot more than me.
I might have missed this part, but when you sack cities, because I know you can sack the cities, are you also able to take supplies from the cities that you sack?
No. Actually, with the cities, as you said, there are several possible methods to gain supply. Um, Two of these methods are plunder and sack a city. Plundering means that you still have your army under control, and you decide voluntarily to uh, take anything, food, water, and cows, simply anything from the city, from the farmers around the city, without paying it. So you're basically acting as a vandal, as a barbarian. We don't pay anything, and you simply plunder everything. Sacking is a decision that a side could take only when after conquering the city after siege. So
After a
at
long
that,
siege. Yeah.
Siege.
yeah,
After siege.
siege, yeah, after siege. Thank you. At that point, you can decide to sack the city, and basically you are giving a green light to your army, to the whole army, to act as they want. There is no limits on anything. So basically, the city comes out completely destroyed. The inhabitants are sold as slaves and so on. So it's a decision that can be taken only in specific situations, and not and has consequences on positive consequences and negative consequences for the side deciding to sack a city.
That's right, because there's the political system in it as well, and cities can lean towards one side or another.
And that's in essence it. If you move in, there is an enemy city, and let's just say it's in a particularly strategic point, you can't leave it behind. You can't leave it garrisoned, sat across your supply line, being the same today as it was 3,500 years ago. So you've got to decide what you want to do with it. And one of the things you might do is besiege the city. The result of that siege, as much as it was all the way up to the 18th century, if it surrenders, and it surrenders early, and it surrenders with honours, then you may well leave it. You may change the government that's in there or whatever, but it simply stays with all the concomitant good and bad effects. Hopefully it will come over to your side. If it resists or becomes an annoyance, then you might take the decision to say, right, it's never doing that again, and you sack the city. How does that help with supply? Well, sacking a city will produce an amount of gold, and of course, to come back to your original question on supplies, you've got living off the land, foraging, if you like. You can carry your supplies with you, but actually that's quite difficult, as Fabrizio shows in the rules, in various slides and things. So baggage trains are enormous things, and the bigger the army, the bigger the baggage train. The bigger the baggage train, the more of its own logistics it eats, and you end up with more bloody loggies than you do with infanteers at the front.
And that affects your movement points too, correct?
And absolutely, it slows everything down. And so one of the things that you will notice if you look at the books that Kevin and Fabrizio have been showing is that unlike most other armies over the last 3,000 years, Alexander very rarely used ox-drawn or buffalo-drawn wagons. And there's a straight biological reason for that, is that your average ox has to eat for 8 hours a day. It sleeps for 8 hours a day, and therefore it only moves 8 hours a day, and it moves at about 2 miles an hour. So, your progress, maximum progress, is 16 miles a day. no matter how many people you've got, and that has an impact on where and how you can move.
Right.
Mules carry to movement ratio amazing. And that goes all the way through. And I mean, Kev said that it stopped in the 1850s, 60s. Well, it didn't. If you look at the Battle of Cassino in 1943, for the winter of 43-44, by the end of that, for the US Fifth Army or the British Eighth Army, mules became far more important than trucks to get stuff up
Good
the
point.
top of hills.
Yeah.
They could carry, and the Germans used people. We try to use mules.
Well, it's because they ate them. They ate their mules.
Yeah, and that sort of stuff. But it's that kind of decision. So you have what sacking will do is sorry, the third method of getting supplies is, of course, to buy them. And that generally makes people like you a bit more if you actually pay for the stuff that you take away. But as Fabrizio said, in real terms, Alexander starts off with a wallet that's got $2 in it, and that's it. Nothing, zero. Persians think they've got gazillions in their treasury, and they sort of do. But like all defense appropriations, the money trickles away and into the sand as faster than you can say whip, and it's gone. So buying stuff is not a great idea as long as you can avoid doing it. And if you do want to buy it, you've got to find money. And one of the ways of finding money is to sack cities. Because it will give you, by the time you've sold off the inhabitants into slavery, nicked everything that's valuable and portable, you've got stuff to pay somebody else to buy supplies with. So they are all in there.
Yeah, but the money also has to be used to reconstitute units and things of that nature.
Or, one of the things is, and this is particularly key for the Macedonians, it's not a very big state. In terms of local, it is a bit like, well, if you like, it's a bit like the Brits taking on the world through the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. You end up paying a lot of other people to do your fighting for you where possible. Whether it's Hessians, whether it's Prussians, whether it's, getting your own colonies and recruiting the local troops into your own army. I mean, that's very much what Alexander does. But to do that, he needs money and the goodwill.
Can I ask something? Just it's slightly off topic, but in reference to what you're saying there, I noticed that there's a negative modifier for mercenaries, but there's like a positive modifier for the Spartans. But these mercenaries are supposed to be professional warriors. Why do they get the negative modifier?
Because that's a peculiarity of Alexander, to a certain degree, in that you slide onto thin ice in the 21st century, but there is a degree of, let's call it nationalism in there. So Alexander is very much a Hellene, a Greek, if you like, in our modern parlance, and he disapproved intensely of Greeks or other Hellenes fighting for non-Hellenic causes.
Yeah.
So, but if you're a hoplite Greek mercenary, well, the only person who's got any money to pay you to go and do that are probably the Persians. So there are lots and lots and lots of mercenaries, Greek mercenaries, fighting in the Persian army.
Yeah.
They get captured. Alexander the Great Nationalist doesn't like that very much. So you get this negative modifier for.
So there was actually
for mercenaries. And the other thing about mercenaries, of course, is if you're only in it for the money and things get bad, why would you stay?
You're out.
There's also
chuck your shield on your back and walk away. And they did quite a lot of that as well at times.
Yeah.
So that's negative for mercenaries, if you like.
Oh, fair point. I was just curious.
There's also another aspect of mercenaries that is that they are actually quite effective on the battlefield. The modifier is not for their fighting skills or fighting capabilities.
Oh, yeah.
The modifier is for their will to die for their employer. So they fight very well, but if possible, they would prefer not to die for the Persian king. And so they give a negative modifier to the overall moral level of the army, because your troops are not so prone to simply die for you.
Yeah, and that only applies if they constitute a certain percentage of the army, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, you have to have a quite big mercenary contingent for having that negative modifier. Yeah.
I mean, I understand the Spartans getting the positive modifier because they're
Spartans. This is Sparta. That's it.
Other films are available, slightly more realistic ones.
But not as
Yeah,
good.
but they're not going to look as good as all those fine young men, are they?
No, they're not.
Yeah, but we actually have Spartans in Fate of War. Because
We do.
was a-
And actually, one of the things they do is the ones that aren't fighting for somebody else or going away can be a real pain in the bottom for Alexander, because, they are, whilst he's away at the other side of Turkey moving down towards Iraq, they're just moving the 150 miles from the Peloponnese up towards the Macedonian border.
There is also another very interesting theory because Philip, father of Alexander, and Alexander both avoided to actually try in a forceful manner to to absorb Sparta and to completely remove any independence from Sparta. They kept Sparta there, reduced, less powerful, but they kept there because somehow the simple presence of an independent Sparta was still in Alexander's days a threat for the rest of Greece. For
It's like a big nasty dog chained up in the back that
for Athens in particular. So it was a good reason. It could have been a good reason for Athens to stick with Macedonia, because after all, Sparta was still there, and who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. That's it. It's quite a smart move by Philip and Alexander, I think.
So, quick question, Fabrizio: with the campaign, it starts. I haven't checked. It starts after Alexander's consolidation of the other sort of tribal areas and groups inside the Greek states, and then it's literally at the launch of the campaign, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It started right at the beginning of the campaign of Alexander. I mean, the initial revolts in the Greek states, in the Greek cities, have been quelled, squashed, and Alexander is now ready to cross the Hellespont and start his campaign against the Persian Empire.
Fantastic.
And it really has to cross the Hellespont, and this is already a first problem for Alexander, because he has to cross it quickly, or the Persian fleet will simply block him.
Right. Now, is it easier for Alexander to cross the Hellespont than the Russians to actually land in Norway?
Yeah.
Inside joke.
Yeah.
Inside joke.
Yeah, it's probably easier.
Yeah. But it is possible for both.
That was freaking difficult until I learned your little trick that you wrote up about that sneaky thing. Anyway,
So we got a question from Mark saying he wants to ask about any examples of great or unusual narrative highlights during testing.
That's a nice question. We had a couple of I wouldn't call it play test, but I've received a couple of emails with an after-action report from a convention in Sweden, and actually they decided that the campaign was too difficult for the Macedonians. It was the first play, and so it's understandable that you don't know exactly how to move or how to overcome certain problems. Anyway, they played the campaign 2 times. The first time, Alexander was killed after 4 months of war in Asia Minor, and he was blatantly defeated on the battlefield, and he was killed while trying to retreat to a friendly city nearby. And the Persian player, by the way, was particularly aggressive, a particularly aggressive player, really very aggressive. And the second run they had with the campaign, Alexander wasn't even able to cross the Hellespont because it took too much time to reach the Hellespont, and so the Persian fleet had the time to gather and to block the Hellespont completely. And not only, but after that, the Persian had an army that disembarked inside Greece and started messing around in Greece everywhere. They had a battle against Antipater that was trying to keep Greece under control with a small army that Alexander left him. And the Antipater army was defeated on the battlefield. And after that, the convention has finished. So I don't know how it ended, but it was quite interesting.
I've had. I decided on one particular thing that we could just probably ignore the Persian fleet in that it takes too long and it's too expensive and it won't get together. And so in essence, I converted almost all the Greek shipping into merchant shipping. I had these fantastic supply lines going all the way down the Levant coast, which lasted for about 2 months after they were set up, as all these rather nasty Persians came rowing up the side of the thing in their triremes and just took them out one after the other. And that left me, or the Alexandrians, they reached Egypt and then couldn't get out of it because there was no way to get in, having burnt the boats behind them quite literally and stripped the countryside of supply, there's nowhere left to go. So they're stuck, Alexander the Pharaoh was the end of that particular, when I just called it, because it was just nonsense. We weren't going anywhere else. They're mine. I think to put a little bit in perspective or give people an idea who perhaps aren't so au fait with the whole of how the Alexandrian campaigns work. The other a simile might be World War II and the sort of German invasion of Russia in World War II, 1941. They've got to go hard and fast to make, if they can go hard and fast to make the key, objectives, and it doesn't matter what they are, and Leningrad, Moscow, get down to the bottom, then they will probably win. And the Russian bear is slow, it's not very effective, it takes a huge time to get itself together. But if you leave it too long, or if you go the wrong way, as a German, then eventually that whole great colossus is going to grow and roll. It may not be very pretty, it may not be tactically adept, it may not be this or that, but it will have numbers on its side, it will have the logistic backing to take it forwards, and the monies to support it. As the people they're taking on become smaller and more agile, as they run out of money, as they run out of resources, and most of the resource being, the manpower to rebuild the units, because it's just not there, or the money to pay for mercenaries because they're just not available anymore. So it lives that.
And there is
I like this.
you can ride into battle.
The most elite cavalry in the history of warfare, the companion cavalry. Think about it. That would be cool.
Well, you can.
So, here's one too. Nordic saying, I'd hate to have to worry about supplying the Persian armies of the period, allowing for exaggerated accounts of their size. The armies were still rather large for the period.
Yeah. The account of a period are clearly much exaggerated.
Millions and millions.
1 million soldiers, 200,000 soldiers with 400,000 cavalry or something like that. They are clearly exaggerating. And most of modern studies actually think and theorize that it's simply not possible to field an army bigger than 100,000 men in Alexander era. So these were probably the numbers, the real numbers on the field, the battlefield in most of the occasions.
Right.
And but already with an army of 100,000 men, the Persian is going to have a lot of problems, and he has to spend a lot of money to keep it supplied. And this is something that an army of that size can, for example, remain static in a region, in an area, in a specific area, only for a maximum of a couple of months, because it's going to literally eat up everything in the area. So after a couple of months, the area will have no foods, probably not even water for 100,000 men.
I think one thing that a lot of folks may not appreciate if we haven't done a lot of reading about the ancient era is that while there may have been an army of 50,000 soldiers, the tradition was that you would have followers, camp followers, which could be the same amount again or more, and they all have to be fed and watered and moved as well. So while an army may be 100,000, it may look like it's 100,000 people, it probably wasn't, right? And that's one of the things that Alexander did differently, right? There were either no or few camp followers. The soldiers marched with 2 or 3 days of rations on their backs, and they moved fast, and there were no pleasantries in the evening with the ladies, and but they didn't have to feed the oxen. Right? I read the other day an oxen eats 2% of its weight a day. Right.
Damn.
So
oxen were specifically prohibited by Philip for logistic, for Macedonian logistic.
Yeah.
But exactly for this reason, they can take a lot of weight with them, but they are slow and they eat a lot. They eat really a lot. Yeah.
So it's pretty fascinating. Now, and I think I don't want us to labor on the logistics of the game because it's really just an enabler. But so I think we should. I think there's a lot of things that excite me about the game, concepts that I'm seeing around the operational movement, right? So those dashes and maneuvers and trying to position yourself in the best terrain so that if you do end up having a battle, which is something we should talk about, right? That you're in the best suited terrain to either win or force your enemy to decide not to fight and move on. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that happens in the game other than just making sure you've got the baggage trains going and stuff like So to me, I think I said it in the shrink rip. You've got all of the nifty, exciting, interesting, fascinating things that happen in the Ancient Worlds series, whatever it's called, the Richard Burks thing. I keep getting the actual name of it wrong.
Great Battles of History, or
the Rise of the Roman Republic and what it's
No.
called, the Ancient Worlds series, I think is what it's called. Anyway, you've got all of that excitement, but then you've got Great Battles of History in a box as well that can literally present any battle, any tactical battle, but it'll be specific to your campaign that you're experiencing. And so you've got all that richness of gameplay there where you have, it's a different system than Great Battles of History, but you get that thematic feel, to me anyway, based on the rule reading I've done, that you've got this great tactical system going on that's quite fresh too. It's different enough to not be Great Battles of History or Ancient Battles Deluxe or whatever the others are. Yep.
That's true.
That's true. Of course it is. You designed it.
The movement thing is interesting, because it's again, it's another one that hasn't changed a great deal over the centuries because people walk as they walk, but it's the size of the armies dictate how fast they can move, and it's not because guys in small armies are all going to go running along on the 300 or whatever. It's because it just takes so long for the start of the head of the column arrives somewhere.
Yeah.
You've got to wait for the rest of it to catch up. And that's hours and hours and hours. So a lot of the guys spend a lot of the days sat around doing bugger all, waiting for somebody else to carry on. Or, the guys at the front are having to do all the hard work of digging in and establishing the camps. And then the guys who arrive at the back. And that's the same if you read accounts of, anybody moving in the American Civil War, anybody moving in Napoleonic period, etc. So
you're always going to have that accordion effect when you have a large
body. So, do you split them up? Well, they will move faster if you split them up into small chunks, and that's in essence, what Napoleon did. Finally, sort of codified the corps d'armée and all the rest of it into the all-arms group that moves. But Alexander had started it. People had started it before that. The difficulty is finding three different. If you split it into three, where are three different routes? Are they going to the same place? Or going to end up at the same place at the same time, and that are not going to get bushwhacked individually by the guy on the other side, by the bad guy.
Is that military jargon for ambushed?
Where you come from.
Something like that. Yeah,
that's part of the big boy decision making of operation. Big boy operational decisions.
Yeah, big boy operational decisions to bushwhack people or not. Anyway. Whatever. The point is that's then where the whole thing about, how fast you can move, what you're doing, how are you moving blindly, can you see where you're going, and you get the whole impetus then of the great thing is light cavalry then. And that's, how you use your light cavalry. And we're back to the big boys' operational decisions. What are you using your light cavalry for? Is your light cavalry going to advance in front of you? Is it going to be pure reconnaissance? Is it going to be a screen of some kind which is actually going to fight? Or, without going back into the subject we already talked about, doing what Nate said, is it actually going to be the people who are actually riding out, picking up all the supplies, dragging in the sheep and the goats and whatever, that we're going to slaughter tonight so that we eat tonight, etc., and salt up for tomorrow or whatever is happening. So you get those. So how many packets do you split it up into? What you do with your cavalry when you're going? How you're going to get there? And what we tried to do was to not have a million counters on the operational map with each bloody cavalry squadron represented here, there, or wherever, each troop of 20 guys doing something. So you decide on what the big picture is. You decide in resource terms, I'm going to do for screening, I'm going to do for foraging, I'm going to do for whatever, and then you roll on the table and you see where you're going for that. Gives you your supplies. But more importantly, that one table also gives you an interaction, a chance to react, because we've all got the helicopter vision. We can see where the other guy's counters are. I think we give you a chance to react to what your opponent is doing.
Right.
But your ability to react is very much dependent upon the functionality of the force that you have that is moving, and that's we think that works quite well. And actually, it does work quite well. We spent a lot of time developing that to get that two tables right. So 2 dice rolls does all of that,
That's
and that
awesome.
sets the scene then for the tactical battle. If you end up on a battlefield, are you going to be able to place terrain? Have you got the advantage? Who's going to go first? Are you outnumbered? All of that stuff. And some things.
And there is, as Tony said, light cavalry is. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It is. But if you use them for a portable Burger King, then tomorrow you're carrying all the stuff that they were dragging along in the whatever.
Yeah, actually, speaking of supply, again, Philip took a lot of specific orders and restriction for the Macedonian army. The oxen were forbidden, only horses and mules. Regarding the number of followers, he decided that there will be only 1 follower, 1 slave every 10 soldiers, and 1 slave every 3 horsemen. Of course, absolutely no women or something like that. Carts were also forbidden. And so basically we formed up and we trained a very flexible and very fast, light army that was able to move quite fast.
And if you want to put that into juxtaposition with what the Persians had, the Persian king decided to take his entire court with him. So that's his entire harem, all the concubines, the cooks, the bottle washers, this is
the treasure too.
And yes, the treasury, which he then lost.
The war chest was almost always near the king, and that became a big problem after losing a battle, of course. That's it.
So now that we've talked about all the oxen and the portable Burger Kings and all of the logistical concerns, let's get into the combat. And John O'Reilly asked, what governs the use of the tactical map? Do both sides have to agree to use it? Is an actual fighting tactical map more advantageous for one side or the other compared to roll on the op map? And we were having a short little discussion about that right before we started. And that's why I was like, let's hold that for the chat, because I think what you guys were getting into is really interesting with regards to the tactical map.
Well, the first and foremost is, do both sides have to agree to use it? Pretty much. If you want to carry on playing with the guy you're playing with, and he says yes and you say no, somebody says bang and walks off. So we would recommend it. We think if you are pressed for time and your thing is, the big hand, small map stuff, the operations, then of course you can resolve a battle very easily with the roll on the table on the map, and then get on with moving and doing the stuff, and it will give you a pretty good result.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to give you a pretty good result, the range of results is not huge, obviously, and it really tends towards the middle. So you get an averaging out, and you're not using much of your own personal, savoir-faire or ability or whatever as a gamer or as anything else. So we would always say, and I'm pretty sure Fabrizio will agree with me in a minute, that take your 2 hours more, set the tactical map up. The result of how you got there, as I said, on the reconnaissance roll and all the rest of it will dictate who's attacking. Well, wrong. Who is in the offensive posture theoretically? Who is the defender theoretically?
Right.
The defender will get to choose if there is any terrain on the map and how it's laid out. And I think we would stress at this point that certainly at this stage in the development of warfare, and certainly in the Middle East, people fought on flat open plains. They did not hide in bodies and jump out. They did not, go through forests if they could avoid them because it just got in the way. So terrain is more about securing your flanks or your rear or breaking up the approach of the bad guy. And frankly, if it's that bad, he won't approach you. And then you play. And what we have in the system, we'll come back and do more detail in a minute, but just to set the scene in general terms, is we've got the Macedonians with quite small, quite agile, but quite efficient troops, mostly, not entirely, and most importantly, with pretty good generals, mostly. Yeah, so they've got good command ratings. On the other side, no, we don't have 2 million Persians, and there isn't a stack of counters 40 high at the back representing all the slave troops. We're just not doing that. But the Persian army will be bigger, unless you've really buggered it up as the Persian and been caught, be bushwhacked, as they would say. So the Persians will be bigger, but they are less tactically agile. So they come in big chunks of 1,000-man blocks, whether they be cavalry or infantry or whatever, which means that they are limited in the numbers you can put in each hex. And their command and control system, they have fewer commanders per hex, per unit as a ratio, and they tend to be less good. So you have a relatively large, not immobile, but not agile, unagile mass on one side, and then a small bunch, including whoever it was that said, with the greatest cavalry in the world, the companions, on the other side, and the companions are led by Alexander. And you can take your 600 cavalrymen companions and go charging through the middle, because that's what you did. Because you could theoretically get them out again, unless the boss gets killed. The boss gets killed, you're pretty buggered. But after that, that's it.
Actually, it would seem like all your experience with the Third World War stuff would kind of lend to that, considering the Russians were kind of like the Persians in the fact they had larger formations commanded by fewer commanders, not quite as good, whereas the Americans or NATO had smaller formations that were more agile and more accurate, a little bit better, and more commanders commanding smaller groups. It seems like there's a little bit of a parallel there.
Yeah, but there is a big difference, I think, with considering the Russians. The Persian army, yes, was big, was not agile, but it was also trained and used to fight in a hit-and-run tactics normally.
Right.
It's only after meeting the Macedonians, we were forced to try changing something in that. Normally, the Persian army had a lot of javelins, a lot of archers, a lot of slingers, and it had always fought hit-and-run battles, where they never tried a frontal assault, shield against shield, melee combat or something like that. That was not in the DNA of the Persian army initially. After, for this kind of fights, they had the mercenaries, the Greek mercenaries. So you really have to go in a clash of shields and spears. Okay, send in the mercenaries, and that's it. it's only after meeting Alexander, Darius was actually quite able, was intelligent and smart enough to understand almost immediately that that kind of army had practically not a chance against Macedonians, and so he immediately tried to change the Persian way of fight. And for example, he tried to train some of his infantry to fight in a hoplite manner, and he trained some of his cavalry to charge in like real heavy cavalry. And of course, these are things that you cannot complete successfully in just a couple of months. So when he met again Alexander, he met for the first time Alexander at Issus, at the Battle of Issus. He already has some hoplite Persian infantry and some heavy cavalry.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it was not the same kind of stuff that the Macedonians were able to field at the moment.
Same, not the same quality, the caduceus or whatever they were called.
Completely different quality. Yeah. That's it.
But in essence, yes, it gives you the same thing. It amounts to the same thing. You have small, tactically agile, well led. You have the others who are, have a different style of fighting, who are perhaps not as agile and have difficulty going up face to face. I think you're not wrong, Gimpy. I mean, if you were to make an analogy into the, I've made the one already in the World War II, but you can do it into the World War III. I think about our games, the best analogy is probably oil, because there you've got really the second line Russian guys in the bottom, with not very much kit or not very much modern kit, and one or two really well equipped. Mostly US formations, either Euro boys or the airborne guys coming in, supported by the kind of things that support them in the 21st century. And they can run rings around them. But if you get caught, if you get stopped, if you get stuck, if you run out of juice to move, and then in the end, the old Russian proverb that quantity has a quality all of its own, runs right in and you get stomped. And that's the same with Alexander. And there is, actually, to go back, there is one, we were asked, are there some unusual tactics or unusual events we were asked for, but it's not so much an unusual event, but an unusual tactic that cuts across that edge between the operational game and the tactical game, is if you tee it up well as the Persian, you try and set up a battle against the Alexandrians, which you may well lose the tactical battle. But the point about it is to cause the maximum casualties that you can on the Macedonian forces. Because you as the Persian then you bring your number 2 army in, cut off his rear, whatever. The Macedonians have huge difficulties in replacing any losses that they've had, because they're having to walk from northern Greece to wherever in Iran or Iraq we've got to by this stage, or Egypt or wherever, the long way round, is one, so it's months before they arrive. But 2, they're just not as many, because it's a small country with a limited manpower pool. So you can take, or you can play the apparent Persian disadvantages to great advantage. Like all these things, you've got to have a bit of luck, and you have to set it up. There's no point in wasting one army if there's not a second one in the wings ready to do the follow-up, against whatever depletion you've done to the Alexandrians.
Yeah, it's attrition-based warfare.
Yeah. I would like to add something to what Tony just said. historically Alexander received reinforcement just a couple of times during the first 4 or 5 years of campaign. And the really significant reinforcement reached Alexander practically after the conquer, after the taking of Babylon. It was something like 15,000 new troops coming from Macedonia. So yes, it becomes more and more difficult for Macedonians to replace significant losses that they had on the battlefield. And money is also a factor, and these two things together makes any losses on the core Macedonian units. I mean the phalanx, the hetairai, the royal companions. Any losses on these units is a very serious loss for Macedonia, and it's difficult to replace.
Well, we got a really good question here from Norik, which is one that I think all wargamers always ask, and that is, he's curious, what is the solitaire suitability for the game?
I could answer that. There is not too much fog of war in the game. I mean, the biggest and practically the only fog of war is that you really don't know how big the enemy army is, and you don't even know who is leading the enemy army. So you're going to face Alexander, or you're going to face only Parmenion, much much more manageable than Alexander. And you have system to discover at least something about the enemy army before they're going into battle, of course with reconnaissance and so on. So yes, it's. I think that it's not more or less suitable for the solitaire play that most of any other war game.
Yeah, I think it's the wrong. Yeah, it's the wrong scale anyway to have a solitaire AI system, and there's too many variables, you know. So.
Yeah,
I mean, we looked at it.
Yeah.
When we started the project, it was mine. I suggested it. I said, "This is dead simple. All the decision making is Alexander's. You know, Persians are just a big, monotonous block, and we must be easily able to write a bot that would run the Persians."
How'd that work out?
Exactly that. You know, it took about really not very long to disavow. I mean, within the first 4 weeks of having an outline set of rules for the operational game, we disavowed ourselves of that.
Yeah,
on the other hand, there are not huge numbers of operational choices. So if you're one of those people who regularly plays both sides, and has that ability to, switch, I'm now side A commander, and I'll make it on the decisions that I would have known, and I'm now side B, you can do it. But it's not perfect for it. Not perfect.
I think most war games are like that, though, and most war gamers are attuned to that, is understanding the fact that, okay, you know what, I'm playing both sides. I love playing both sides for the simple fact that, to me, it's 2 games in one, because I look at it from 2 different perspectives. And if there's any little bit of hidden thing, like I don't know which leader is going to be on that side or something like that, well, there's ways you can kind of get around it a little bit. But like you said, the reconnaissance kind of negates the concern there, because you should always be sending out reconnaissance anyway and reconning who you're going to be fighting, and that would be what would tell you whether it's Alexander or not. So,
and I think we also have to be reasonably realistic in those times. On the one hand, numbers might get exaggerated, but yes, you did know if there was a big bunch of bad guys over there, and you probably tend to know who was in charge of them.
Yeah.
Because if you're Alexander the Great wandering around on your white horse, you've got a reputation to maintain. You want to be known. You want your presence to be broadcast far and wide.
Yeah.
So it's not exactly difficult for and the Persians to work out where Alexander is. And actually, the opposite is true. When you've got Darius II moving around with this huge circus of an entourage behind him.
For example, the simple presence of Alexander can increase the possibilities for a city to voluntarily surrender. So this is something that Macedonia is going to use because it doesn't have the time to lose to spend in a long siege.
Yeah.
And
So
it will make it clearly known where Alexander is because, as Tony said, he wants.
He was a social
Alexander
media
is
influencer over his time.
Yeah, and he also wants people to be scared into surrendering versus having a siege.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. How about you talk a little bit, Fabrizio, about the fate cards and how they're used in the game? Because that's a nice idea.
Hold on, real quick before you guys jump into that. I hate to do this, but I have to go. It is my little girl's birthday, and they're ready to go. So I apologize. I really do appreciate Tony and Fabrizio coming on. It was great hearing about the game. Can't wait to try it. Again, sorry I have to leave, but it's my girl's birthday. I got to be there for it.
Go do your father's duty. That's it.
You guys take care. I'll talk to you later, right?
Thanks,
Yeah, happy birthday to her. All right, now he's gone. No. I'd throw that in there because if he watches, he'd be like,
I would also like to add something about the political aspect that NATO was talking about half an hour ago. There are a lot of political aspects in the game because every satrapy and every province has an allegiance toward the Persians or toward Macedonians that can shift depending by the political actions and the military action that both sides take in the campaign. For example, are you going to apply the very effective scorched earth policy to the Persian satrapies? Good idea. You're definitely cutting the supply that Macedonians can take from that satrapies, but at the same time, the local satrapies are not happy with you. That you're simply ruining their income.
Right.
You're ruining their reputation with the local population. So they start to shift toward the Macedonians. Another interesting thing is that are you going to sack that city? Sacking a city, as Tony said, would bring you gold, but at the same time it could have an unpredictable effect on the other cities in the satrapies, because of course Alexander a couple of times sacked a city to punish the city for its resistance against him.
Yeah.
Hoping that this punishment, this terrible punishment, will convince the other cities to surrender voluntarily immediately. Actually, there were mixed effects historically. Sometimes that worked as Alexander expected, but other times actually it convinced other cities to resist to Macedonians to avoid the same fate. So the sacking has the same effect in the game, and it's mostly unpredictable. You can have the two faces of the same coins of the same time. Who knows?
So did you have a fate card in mind, or a couple of fate cards in mind, Kev? 'Cause-
Can I just say something? Right at the beginning of this process, almost the very first email interaction we had, he said, "We're doing this game and we're not having any of those bloody gods or fates or nonsense like that. I don't do that. I don't do that."
No strange gods.
About 6 weeks later, he sent me, "Oh, here's the first fake card that I'd like you to have a look at. And it's the one that says, 'The gods have blessed you, you're going out with some.'"
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, so how did you decide to use it?
Yeah, it's true that gods are named in a couple of events or something like that, but it's actually how the event or the thing would have been perceived at the time. But of course, there is no real gods behind it. That's it.
I think what we want to say is what you have on the fake cards are events that either happened or could have happened in one or two cases. Written in the language of the time, so yes, it does involve the fates, the gods, the furies, this, that, and the other, and how they pan out, well or not. But what we do not have are some kind of, card.
This is true.
Indeed, they are. Well, we all know that.
Yep.
Indeed, they are, and nobody would wish to offend them at this stage. But what we don't do with the cards is turn around and say, if you play this card, all of a sudden, 5,000. Apollo grants you 4,000 new mercenaries, and they appear.
Right.
Or strike the. What was it? As I said in the warm up, Apollo in his chariot appears over the battlefield, throwing out those.
Lightning bolts. Yep.
Yeah, they sort of don't belong into a historical gaming thing. But if you turn around and say, rather than just saying, the supply ship sank because the supply ship sank, you might say that Poseidon got a bit pissed off and some of your supply ships haven't made it.
Which is the way it would have been interpreted at the time.
Yeah, and so I noticed in one of the scenarios that only specific event cards are available to be drawn and things like that. So you've done some thinking about it, which is nice. It's not the same deck every time. And then the other thing that I was curious about is, and I haven't, because I read the rules 2 months ago, right? So or longer. But how often are we drawing? Are we drawing every turn, every month? Are we drawing a fake card, or is it based on some other factor? How are fake cards?
Yeah. Basically, you roll die every month, and on a result of 9 or 10, you pick a fake card.
You pick a fake card, right? So it's not a draw, right?
You take the first fake card.
No. It's off the top of the deck, so you don't know what.
Okay, it is top of the deck.
The one on the top. The one on the top of the deck.
So you draw it.
You play the card, and after you play the card, you put the card back in the deck, and you shuffle the deck. So
that's great.
So what you're saying is
basically you've got to play the dice cards to see whether you get a 9 or a 10. And if the card is good to you, you get to then have another go by drawing the card.
And here you guys are saying gods don't have any effect on the game. It all comes down to dice cards.
You'll get a card about once every 5 to 6 turns, something like that. Yeah, 1 in 5, something like that.
Some cards are quite interesting. Some other cards you can expect them. You can have a drought period in some region. You can have a particularly good harvest in some region. You can have a storm at sea.
Extra supply or whatever.
Yeah. There are at least a couple of cards that are strictly linked to Alexander personality. there is the Oriental marriage card, where Alexander marry some noble Persian woman, and this has a good impact for the legends, for the legends of satrapy, but at the same time it lowers Macedonian morale. Because, it's not something that most of Macedonian companions will take as a good move.
If you go around playing the nationalist card your entire life and then suddenly don't, do something that's diametrically opposed to it.
Yeah. Another interesting card is Alexander killing one of his companions. That is another event that historically happened. Yep. So you just pick.
Plenty of that.
Cletus the Black, the poor Cletus the Black was killed on the spot. Yeah, and there is anyway different options, different events, fates.
That's good. Yeah,
very
that's
interesting.
Good. Yep. Yeah, cool. Very cool.
So I got a question for the audience. Those, I know I've seen a bunch of people that have said that they've ordered their copy, they're waiting on their copy. There was one that was actually making me laugh up here was, who was it?
The shipping, the mail.
Yeah. Almost solitary, waiting for my game in Finland. I guess the trireme carrying it needs to wait for the ice to break before it can reach any port here, unfortunately. But that's shipping things that are beyond anyone's control. But I thought that was kind of funny. But of the people who are watching, who has not yet ordered it, and is this something that now, after listening to Tony and Fabrizio explain more about the game, are you now curious about it, and are you planning on getting it? Because, like they said at the beginning of the show, if you came in a little bit late, there are not that many copies left. They're almost sold out, so definitely don't miss out on that. But are you planning on getting it? Put any of that answer down in the chat. Anybody who's going to answer on that. And Mark Ruggiero says he's got his notice no icebreakers needed. He's in California.
Yeah, I saw someone say that the Danish Post takes 3 days to mail a letter across Denmark, but what do you expect, right? So they were impressed that someone
taking it by ox.
So quickly. Yeah, taking it by ox, right? It's unionized ox, no less.
So just wanted to see if anybody has any answer in there. Now, this is a plan. You're planning on expanding it into other games as well, correct? Are you going to have expansions, or are you going to have separate games?
No, sorry if the memo didn't get you.
Separate games.
Oh, so they're going to be separate.
We're going to have an expansion, i.e., are we going to produce another module, or do we produce a different game? Are we going to produce it? I don't know. Let's have a production discussion here. But I think the principle at the moment is that the next thing that we would look at would be, as Fabrizio said earlier in the evening, is not immediately another Alexandrian module, because this game does Alexander up to Babylon, and it does the successors, or the initial part of the successors' war. Would we want to produce the thing that would be a module to this game? Would be saying we go from Babylon to the Indus. I don't, unless you're going to tell me differently, I don't think we have a plan to do that in the near term.
No.
We would rather do another part of ancient history, as Fabrizio says, perhaps the Roman civic wars, perhaps the Punic wars. We both have interest in both of those, and actually, which would give us a different set of mapping again, a different set of some developments in unit types. There is as we go past the Alexandrian age, the more effective light infantry types start to come in, whether you're calling them Roman auxilia or whether you're calling them Peltsats or whatever.
You've got the pre-post-Marian
pre-post-Marian reforms. That's on the tactical level, and at the operational level, you go from the the Middle East and Levant. Let's move it to the Central Europe, his homeland. I mean, you
I
know,
completely agree with this. The early Roman Republic is a Greek period. Yep.
yeah.
And,
Anyway, we probably move into two different directions. As Tony said, we are going to move probably in the Roman period for a completely new module for the Strategicum book number 2. At the same time, I would really like to release some expansion for this already existing module. Yeah, I would really like, for example, something of
Production decisions online, you get them.
I
think you
would
should add
really
more
like
fake
to
ones.
have an expansion with only new counters and new scenarios for the Persian Wars in
Persian Wars, yeah.
in Greece, or for
the rest of the Diadoche, you know, you could do that too,
yeah,
right?
yeah, that one too.
Yeah, because that was a 20-year war, right? So
Really a lot of possibility. Of course, we are a really small publisher, and so the time we will see. I would love to do a lot of things, but the time is short, life is short, and I have no idea. We'll see. But
less wine, more work. Huh?
yeah.
Very.
We kept cracking the whip over here.
I was going to say very sadly, but it isn't very sadly. It's of course it's very, and the other reality is that, you know, we still have 1 or 2 World War III ones to finish off as well. That,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
Anyway, but the next thing we are going to develop is the fourth module for the C3 series. So in a dark wood covering the US 7th Corps area responsibility. That's where we are going to move in the immediate future. And after that, we'll see.
Excellent. So Nordic says that he's not ordered the game, but because of finances, but quite invested in the Great Battles of History series. And if he can find the game down the line, he will. So you may have to wait for a reprint because that's one of those things where the game sells out, and you'll either have to get it after the fact if someone is selling a copy, or you find a friend of yours that it's like, you know what, hey, I need to sell, I need to get rid of some games to sell, clear up some space or something. Maybe you can get a good deal on it, or you just wait for the reprint. But unfortunately, finances do affect everybody, especially right now with the economy the way it's going. But definitely wants to pick it up. It is a topic very near and dear to him. And then John saying he's not ordered, however, it's piqued his interest, and he's a solitaire player. That is what holds him back, but I really like what I've heard. Excited to see coverage of it. But here's a question for you, John. If you're a solitaire wargamer, how do you play other war games which, pretty much need 2 opponents? This is going to be your standard war game where you need 2 opponents. Are you used to and you enjoy playing 2 sides as yourself? Or do you really feel like, are you one of those war gamers that's, I really want to have an opponent? Because there will be a vassal module, correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, there is, yeah.
So there's the other option. You can get the game and you can play it solitaire when the urge is there. You want to play the game and move the pieces, but you'll also be able to play against an opponent using the vassal module. So that's something to bear in mind as well.
Yeah, why don't you and Nordic get together and split the cost of it, and one of you keep it, and both you play it online together.
Now there is one here, Bobby,
Shoot to
that
each
says,
other.
I don't do ancients often, but I look forward to Oxenberger. So I expect an Oxenberger recipe to be up on the TRO games.
Yeah.
There was regarding Oxenbergers. I can't remember right now if it made in the final version of the rules, but it was a time where we were evaluating that you can actually eat your
baggage train.
Your baggage train at one time you can. It costs money to create it, but if you're really desperate, you can turn it actually into one supply point.
Yeah.
So
I can't remember if it, but in any case, it would be an interesting optional route. That's
just don't burn it and make it where you have to do that. You have to be able to have enough wood
yeah.
I'm
to
getting,
have a fire to cook.
No. Bear in mind, we're a European country, so it's not Oxford burgers, it's steak tartare.
Exactly. I love steak tartare.
Well, see.
There you go. Those cameras that Ted was just showing look fantastic.
When we moved to France 5 years ago, I think I've been eating at least one steak tartare every day. Every single day.
I'm not sure that's
Just
good for
love
you.
it. Love it.
Well, I'm about to start clipping the Persians. I've just finished while we've been talking, clipping all the Greeks. So we're good to go.
This isn't a camera clipping show. It's Gary's thing.
Yeah, but I'm not talking and drinking whiskey at the same time. I can't clip cameras, drink whiskey, and talk intelligently at the same time. He's a genius. I'm just a war gamer. What is? We're an hour and a half. What are we doing here?
Yeah, we're going to get ready to wrap it up. So I was just I was looking through the last of the comments here.
All right,
and Mark has a great comment. It says, Thin Red Line are a fantastic example of a small but dynamic company doing some great work for the genre. Great to put pieces to the names and dice to the gods. So, we've had them on before. We'll have them on again. And we love having these guys on. They have a lot of great information. They make a lot of great games. And if you are not already familiar with them, go over to trlgames.com and pick up any of the fantastic games they make. And John's saying he does play Two-Handed Vessel's a good option. He's getting closer to the buy button. So don't delay, though, because we are running really low on stock. And then where it says, I may get confused with the lack of tanks in the game. But hey, you know what? There is something that's really cool. You got, in this game, you've got elephants that can pass through or go into rampage. And that is awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome. There's nothing like good elephant rampage.
Yes.
This is epic. Use at your own risk.
Yeah. You never know. It could stomp on you too. You can blow up in your own hand. So, but I think that's pretty cool. And we are going to wrap it up here. So, really appreciate you guys showing up today to watch the show, the audience members, and again, special thanks to Tony Fabrizio for coming in and joining us to talk about their new game, The Fate of All. And go over to trlgames.com and place an order for it. And while you're there, place an order for any of the games that may still be left in stock, because you guys sell out of them pretty quick. So if there is anything available, make sure to pick it up. But anybody else have any last words here before we sign off for the night?
I'm good. I got two more counter sheets to go. I'm good. I'm starting to start rolling dice.
There you go.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Well, Tony Fabrizio, thanks a lot. And we will see you. We have one special show next week. Next Saturday is a very special show for Mark Ruggiero. We're going to be doing a live auction here on Saturday with Uva from Sound of Drums Games for his game Hail Out 1807. So make sure you're here next Saturday afternoon for a live auction. That's all to benefit our friend Mark Ruggiero. So we will see you guys next week and have a great weekend. Have a great night, everybody.